My daughter-in-law's voice on the phone was smooth as glass. The doctor's office called. They've scheduled your cognitive assessment for the 3rd. I told them you've been getting very confused lately. The receiver went cold against my ear, a chill that crept into my hand and up my arm, settling deep in my chest. My son, Thomas, she had said, agreed it was for the best. My son. The breath I was holding released in a silent, shaky stream. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I am 72 years old. For 50 of those years I have lived in this house, a quiet life that my daughter-in-law, Chloe, has always mistaken for a small one. She believed she was saving me from my own decline, a final, merciful act of management. But there was something she didn't know, something no one knew. If she had any idea what she had just tried to take from me, she would have sooner set fire to her own meticulously curated home. To understand the silence that followed her words, the cold clarity that replaced the shock, you need to know who I really am. It begins, as so many things do, with love and with money, or rather, the lack of it. I did not grow up in a house like this, a house with floors that don't creak and windows that keep out the winter wind. I grew up in a 2-room apartment above a bakery where the smell of yeast was a permanent part of the air and my mother's hands were always dusted with flour, whether she had been baking or not. She was a good woman, but her goodness was a quiet, weary thing. I remember watching her count out pennies for a loaf of day-old bread, her face pinched with a humiliation so private it was almost invisible. That expression is etched into my memory. It became the ghost I spent my life trying to outrun. Then I met Robert. He was not a dramatic man. There was no lightning strike, no grand romantic pronouncements. He was a graduate student in history, and I was shelving books at the university library to pay for my own studies in literature. He first spoke to me because I had misshelved a book on medieval cartography. He didn't mock me. He simply, gently explained the library's specific cataloging system for oversized folios. He smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco, a scent I would come to associate with safety for the rest of my life. He had chalk dust permanently embedded in the cuffs of his tweed jackets from leaning against blackboards, and his glasses were always smudged. He was the kindest, most solid person I had ever known. We married a year later. It was a courthouse affair. We had 5 guests and ate cake in our tiny apartment afterwards. That night, Robert gave me his wedding gift. It wasn't jewelry. It was a book, bound in worn dark blue leather, a first edition of Milton's Areopagitica. I remember the weight of it in my hands, the crisp, delicate rustle of the pages. It's about the freedom of the press, the freedom of ideas, he told me, his voice soft in the quiet of our room. It argues that we shouldn't be afraid of encountering different or difficult thoughts. That truth is strongest when it's tested. He touched the cover. I thought it was a good principle for a marriage. That book became the cornerstone of our life together. Robert went on to become the head archivist for the university. His world was one of silent, climate-controlled rooms, of acid-free paper, and the careful preservation of the past. He loved the tangible history of things, the story a watermark or a binding could tell, and he saw something in me that I had not yet seen in myself. He saw my fascination with the text, not just the story, but the object itself, the ink, the paper, the script. He started bringing things home, facsimiles at first, then photographs of manuscripts from the university's collection. "What do you see, Elle?" he would ask. I saw forgeries. I saw anachronisms in the letter forms, inconsistencies in the ink spread. I saw things his trained historians missed because they were looking at the words, and I was looking at the hand that wrote them. It was a game at first. Then one evening he came home with a troubled look and a folder of high-resolution photographs of a recently acquired letter, supposedly from John Donne. The university had paid a significant sum for it. "The provenance is perfect," he said, spreading the photos on our dining table. "But something feels wrong. It's too neat." I spent 3 days with those photographs. I used the magnifying glass Robert had given me, the one with the built-in light. I cross-referenced the script with authenticated letters from the same period. On the 3rd night, I found it. a single tiny detail. The crossbar of a T was made with a pressure and a flick of the wrist that didn't exist in English penmanship until 50 years after Dawn was dead. It was a beautiful expert forgery, but it was a forgery. Robert took my notes to his superiors. They were skeptical, then they were stunned. They brought in an outside expert who confirmed my findings. The university quietly returned the letter and got its money back. They also tried to hire me. I refused. I didn't want the bureaucracy, the meetings, the academic politics. So what do you want? Robert asked me that night, pouring us both a small glass of sherry, a rare celebration. I want the work, I said. Just the work, quietly. And so E.V. Vance was born. Robert, through his network of archivists and rare book dealers, became my discreet agent. The work came to me in plain brown packages. I was a ghost, a name whispered among a very small, very wealthy circle of collectors, auction houses, and libraries. I authenticated manuscripts from a desk in the corner of our bedroom. I exposed forgeries that would have cost institutions millions. I was paid through a numbered corporation Robert had set up with a discreet Swiss firm. The money was abstract, numbers on a statement that arrived twice a year in a plain envelope. It went into accounts that grew and grew untouched. We lived on Robert's modest salary. We bought this house because it was sturdy and had a good garden. We raised our son, Thomas, here. The money was never the point. The work was the point. It was our secret, our intellectual adventure. It was the principle of the thing. Truth is strongest when it's tested. Thomas grew up a happy boy, surrounded by books and the quiet love of two people who adored him. I remember one summer afternoon, he must have been 7 or 8, he was trying to build a castle out of wooden blocks in the living room. It kept collapsing. He was getting frustrated, his face red, tears welling. Robert sat down on the floor beside him, not saying a word. He didn't touch the blocks. He just watched, his presence a calm anchor. After a few minutes, Thomas took a deep breath, looked at the pile of blocks, and started again, this time building a wider, more stable base. The tower rose, steady and true. When he placed the last block on top, he looked at his father with such pure, uncomplicated pride. Robert just nodded, a small, quiet smile on his face. A good foundation, son, he said. That's everything. We never told Thomas about my work. It felt like a complication he didn't need. How do you explain to a child that his mother, who packs his lunch and reads him bedtime stories, spends her afternoons uncovering the deceptions of centuries? It was our private world. When Robert got sick, it was a slow, quiet fading. The cancer took his strength, but never his mind. The last week in the hospital, his voice was a dry whisper. He made me promise 2 things. Keep the work, Elle, he said, his hand cool in mine. It's your truth. Don't let anyone take it from you. Then he gave me a small, heavy brass key. The rosewood box in my closet. Don't open it until you need to. You'll know when. He passed away 2 days later. The silence in the house was immense. Thomas was a grown man by then, an architect with a promising career. He was a good son. He grieved with me, helped with the arrangements, made sure I was eating, and then, 6 months later, he brought Chloe home to meet me. The first time she walked into my house, the first thing I smelled was her perfume. It was a sharp, floral scent that seemed to take up all the air in the room, a stark contrast to the familiar smell of old books and cedar that I loved. She was beautiful, polished, her movements precise and confident. She looked around my living room, her eyes scanning the worn armchairs, the shelves crowded with Robert's history tomes and my literature collections. Your home is so cozy, she said. The word hung in the air, a perfect little jewel of condescension. It was the first of many. Thomas was utterly besotted. He saw her ambition as strength, her materialism as a sign of success. I saw the ghost of my mother's pained face in the back of Chloe's eyes. She was running from something, just as I had been, but where I had run toward knowledge and quiet competence, Chloe ran toward appearances. She performed wealth because she was terrified of the poverty she had escaped. Her parents, she once let slip in a moment of unguarded frustration, had no ambition, and she had spent her life watching her mother be patronized by wealthier relatives. I understood her motivation. I truly did. But understanding is not the same as excusing. They married a year later, a lavish affair that I know Thomas could not really afford. I offered to help. Nonsense, Eleanor, Chloe said, waving a dismissive hand. We have it handled. But they didn't. The calls began a few months after the wedding. It started small. Thomas, his voice strained. Mom, we're a little short on the property taxes this quarter. Could you possibly? Of course I could. I wrote a check for $5,000. It was a drop in the ocean of the Swiss accounts, but it was a significant portion of the money I kept in my local bank for living expenses. The money from Robert's pension. The financial ledger began that day, not on paper but in my head. $5,000 for property taxes. A memory attached. Me, choosing not to replace the threadbare rug in my hallway. A year later, it was the down payment for their house, a sleek, modern box of glass and steel that Chloe had found in an exclusive development, the kind of house that is featured in magazines. It's an investment, Mom, Thomas explained, his words echoing Chloe's. The market is hot. We'd be foolish not to get in. The amount they were short was staggering. $150,000. Eleanor, you must have something tucked away, Chloe said to me over lunch, her tone one of gentle, encouraging reason. Robert was a prudent man. People of your generation knew how to save. I thought of the untouched millions. I thought of Robert's promise. I thought of the life we had chosen, a life of quiet purpose that had nothing to do with glass houses and German appliances. But this was my son, my only child. I wired the money. It was nearly all the personal savings I had accumulated in my regular accounts over 40 years. My what if fund, what if the roof leaks, what if the car dies for good. The entry in my mental ledger was heavy, $150,000 for the down payment, a memory attached, selling Robert's stamp collection, the one he'd curated since he was a boy, because I needed to replenish my local emergency fund. Chloe had called the collection a dusty old album. The requests became more frequent, more audacious. $10,000 for a country club membership. It's for networking, Eleanor. It's how business is done, Chloe explained as if to a child. $20,000 to lease a new luxury car after Thomas's was unfortunately totaled in a minor fender bender. $50,000 to invest in a can't-miss real estate opportunity Chloe was brokering. Each time I said yes. Each time Thomas's gratitude was effusive, and Chloe's was smooth and proprietary, as if she were merely accessing a resource that was rightfully hers. The condescension grew in proportion to their debt to me. My simple clothes were wonderfully unconcerned with fashion. My refusal to buy a new smartphone was charming in a retro way. My home, once cozy, became a bit cluttered and stuck in the past. One afternoon, Chloe was visiting. She picked up the first edition of Areopagitica from the mantelpiece, where it had sat for 50 years. She blew a non-existent speck of dust from the cover. Honestly, Eleanor, why keep these dusty old things? She asked, her voice light. You could get a nice new paperback that's easier to read. We could get you a Kindle for your birthday. It can hold thousands of books. I felt a cold knot form behind my sternum. I simply took the book from her hand and placed it back on the mantel. I like this one, I said. She sighed, a little puff of performative exasperation. You're just so sentimental. The total in my head grew. It passed $500,000, money I had earned with my mind, my focus, my secret expertise, money that was being spent on fleeting status symbols and the desperate performance of a life they could not afford. I continued my work, the packages arriving and departing, the numbers in the Swiss accounts swelling. The contrast was a chasm. In my quiet study, I was a respected authority, a final word. In my own family, I was a sentimental old woman, a walking bank account, a problem to be managed. I kept silent because he was my son. I kept silent because of that memory of a little boy building a block tower, his face alight with pride. I thought I was protecting him, giving him the foundation he needed. I see now I was the foundation, and they were building their fragile, glittering castle right on top of me. The final betrayal, the one that broke the spell, began with a fall. I was pruning the roses in my garden, Robert's roses, and I missed a step on the ladder. It was a silly, simple fall. I landed on the soft grass, more startled than hurt. A scraped elbow, a bruised hip. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, saw it happen and insisted on calling Thomas. He and Chloe arrived in a flurry of performative concern. Chloe's eyes, however, held a gleam of something else, an opportunity. See, Mom, this house is too much for you, Thomas said, his brow furrowed with genuine worry, a worry that Chloe immediately began to shape. He's right, Eleanor, she said, her hand on his arm. And you've been so forgetful lately. You forgot our dinner reservation last week. I had not forgotten. I had canceled because I had a deadline on a particularly complex authentication, a potential Shakespearean folio. I had told Thomas this. He had forgotten. And you keep losing your keys, she continued, her voice resonating with manufactured patience. I had not lost my keys. Chloe had borrowed my spare set to have a copy made and had forgotten to return them for 3 days. This was her new narrative. I was not a person. I was a liability, a collection of symptoms. The fall was not an accident. It was a data point. The gaslighting was subtle at first, then relentless. She would move things in my house, my reading glasses, the television remote, a specific bill I needed to pay, and then watch with feigned sympathy as I searched for them. Oh, Eleanor, it was right here the whole time. You just didn't see it. Thomas, caught in the middle, began to believe her. It was easier than confronting the truth of their financial dependence on me. If I was incompetent, then their taking control was not a power grab. It was a duty, a kindness. The grand total in my mental ledger had reached $780,000. It was a number that had a physical weight. It was the price of my son's affection, the cost of being allowed to exist in my own family. And it was no longer enough. They didn't want my money anymore. They wanted my life, which brings me back to the phone call, to Chloe's smooth, chilling voice informing me of my own cognitive decline. I told them you've been getting very confused lately. There it was, the culmination of years of quiet erosion. She hadn't just lied to a doctor. She had tried to steal my mind, to rewrite my reality. She had taken my son with her. I hung up the phone. My hand was trembling, but not from fear. It was something else, something cold and hard and clear, the feeling you get when a complex forgery finally reveals its fatal flaw. For years, I had been examining their lives, their motives, their love for me, looking for the authentic mark. And I had been willfully ignoring the obvious. It was all a fake, a beautiful, expert forgery. I sat there in the silence of my living room, the scent of old paper and cedar a comfort around me. The sun cast a long shadow from the grandfather clock in the hall. Tick, tock. The sound of time, my time, which they were trying to steal. I thought of Robert's words, truth is strongest when it's tested. My love for my son had been tested, and it had been found wanting, not on my part, but on his. I thought of his other words, don't open it until you need to. You'll know when. I knew. I walked upstairs to my bedroom, to the closet where Robert's things still hung, smelling faintly of him. On the top shelf behind his winter coats was the rosewood box. It was heavy, the wood dark and smooth under my fingers. I took it down and placed it on my desk. The small brass key, which I had kept in my jewelry box for years, slid into the lock with a satisfying click. The moment of the betrayal, the real one, wasn't just the phone call. It was a scene that had replayed in my mind 1,000 times since. I was sitting in my kitchen, the phone still warm in my hand from Chloe's pronouncement. The air itself felt thin, difficult to draw into my lungs. On the table in front of me was a pamphlet for the Botanical Gardens, a place Robert and I used to love. It was their annual rose festival. I had been planning to go. The pamphlet was glossy, and a picture of a perfect dew-kissed pink rose smiled up at me. As the reality of what Chloe had done settled in, not just arranging an appointment, but creating a false medical narrative, enlisting my own son as a witness against my mind, my hand, which had been resting on the table, spasmed. Not a violent jerk, just a sudden loss of strength. The pamphlet slipped from beneath my fingers. It didn't fall flat. It caught a draft from the open window and fluttered, turning over and over, before landing face down on the linoleum floor. Roses. They were supposed to have roses. The thought was absurd, irrelevant, and yet it was the only thing in my head. A cold stone formed behind my sternum, heavy and immovable. It wasn't sadness. Sadness is a warm, wet thing. This was cold, dry, and absolute. It was the feeling of a door locking, of a path ending. I looked at the overturned pamphlet on the floor and felt nothing for the roses, nothing for the festival. Something inside me had gone still. That was the moment I stopped being a mother and became an archivist of my own life. I was no longer a participant in the family drama. I was an examiner, standing outside of it, looking for the truth in the evidence. I walked upstairs, the sound of my own footsteps steady on the wooden stairs. I went to Robert's closet and retrieved the rosewood box. The brass key felt heavy and real in my palm. Inside there was no emotional treasure, no bundle of love letters. Robert was not a sentimental man. He was a practical one. The box was lined with dark green velvet. Nestled inside were three things. The first was a series of thin, leather-bound ledgers. I opened the top one. Robert's precise academic script filled the pages. He had kept his own records, every authentication I had ever done. The client, the manuscript, the fee, the date. It was a complete history of my secret life, my secret career, documented with the meticulous care of a master archivist. He had cataloged my competence. The second object was a single heavy business card. It was cream-colored, exquisitely thick paper stock with embossed lettering. It read, Jean-Pierre Dubois, Dubois and Associates, Geneva. Below the name was a phone number and nothing else. Mr. Dubois was the man who managed the corporation, the man who had overseen the accounts for 30 years. I had never spoken to him. Robert had handled everything. The third thing was a sealed envelope made of thick, creamy paper, with my name, Eleanor, written on the front in Robert's hand. It was not a love letter. I knew without opening it. It was a contingency plan. I sat at my desk for a long time, the contents of the box spread before me. The ledgers, the card, the letter. They were not just objects. They were my truth. A truth I had kept hidden out of a misplaced sense of humility, a desire not to complicate my son's life or intimidate him with a success he couldn't comprehend. I saw now that my silence had not been a kindness. It had been a void, and into that void Chloe had poured her own narrative of my weakness, my confusion, my incompetence. She had defined me because I had refused to define myself. No more. The decision was not a storm of emotion. It was a quiet, cold click, like the lock on the rosewood box. I would go to the cognitive assessment. I would walk into the trap she had set for me, and I would bring the truth with me. The first call I made was not to a lawyer. It was to Geneva. A woman with a crisp, multilingual accent answered on the second ring. I asked for Mr. Dubois. When he came on the line, his English was perfect, tinged with a faint French accent. Mr. Dubois, my name is Eleanor Vance. My husband, Robert Vance, was your client. There was a brief, respectful pause. Madam Vance, he said, his voice warm with a professional courtesy that felt like a balm. I am so very sorry for your loss. Your husband was a man of remarkable integrity. I have been waiting for your call for some years now. How may I be of service? I told him. I told him everything. I did not embellish or complain. I stated the facts as I knew them, the financial demands, the escalating manipulation, the forced medical appointment. He listened without interruption. The silence on the other end of the line was not empty. It was attentive. When I finished, he said, I see. This is unacceptable. Robert was very clear in his instructions for such a contingency. He called it the Areopagitica Protocol, a defense of truth. A sad smile touched my lips. Of course he did. Madame Vance, Mr. Dubois continued, his voice shifting from warm to still. Your portfolio is, to be blunt, extensive. You are the sole owner of a corporation that holds significant assets. The idea that you could be declared incompetent is, from a financial standpoint, ludicrous. I will have a complete portfolio summary and a letter of verification from my firm messengered to you immediately. It will be on your doorstep in 48 hours. Is there anything else? Yes, I said. I need you to find me the best lawyer in my city who specializes in elder law and financial exploitation. Someone formidable. Consider it done, he said. You will have a name and number within the hour. An hour later, I had the name, Mr. Alastair Davies. The next morning, I was sitting in his office. The room smelled of old leather, strong coffee, and something else, the faint, clean scent of lemon polish. It was a smell of order, of control, Mr. Davies was a man in his late 60s, with a mane of white hair and eyes that were surprisingly kind. He listened to my story, his hands steepled on his large mahogany desk. I gave him the short version, the facts, the numbers. I didn't speak of my hurt feelings. I spoke of the wire transfers, the dates, the amounts. I was calm. My voice came out differently than I expected. It was no longer the voice of a woman asking for permission to exist. It was the voice of E. V. Vance, factual, precise. When I finished, he was silent for a moment. He looked at me, not with pity, but with a kind of weary respect. Mesdames, Mrs. Vance, he said, his voice a low, steady baritone. In my 40 years of practice, I have seen this story in 100 different variations, but rarely have I seen it documented so thoroughly. He gestured to the mental ledger I had recited. My husband was an archivist, I said simply. He taught me the value of keeping records. A wise man, mister. Davies nodded. So, your daughter-in-law has arranged for a cognitive assessment with Dr. Eris Thorne. He raised an eyebrow. She aims high. Thorne is the best neurologist in the state. His opinion carries immense weight. She believes she can persuade him you are declining, and then petition the court for conservatorship. Yes, I said, that is what I believe. Then we will let her, he said, a glint in his eye. We will let her build her case. We will let her walk right into Dr. Thorne's office, confident that she has you cornered, and you, Mrs. Vance, will simply be yourself. He paused. It would help, however, to have some contemporary validation of your professional standing. The records from your husband are excellent, but something current would be definitive. I knew exactly what he meant. I went home and made another call, this one to a number in London. It was to the head of the rare manuscripts department at Sotheby's, a man named Julian Croft, with whom I had worked anonymously for over a decade. I explained the situation again with calm precision. Julian, a man known for his unflappable British reserve, was audibly shocked. Good heavens, Eleanor, he sputtered. That's monstrous. Of course, anything you need. In fact, he paused. This is serendipitous. We were about to send you a formal invitation. The university in Leipzig is holding a symposium on 17th century bibliographic studies. They specifically requested you as the keynote speaker. They want you to do a presentation on the authentication of the new Milton Folio, your big discovery from last month. It's a significant honor. The invitation letter is on my desk. I'll have it sent by courier along with a letter of my own, attesting to your long and invaluable service to us. It will leave no room for doubt about your faculties. The pieces were coming together. Not my plan, but Robert's. The Areopagitica Protocol, a defense of truth built on a foundation of competence. While I waited for the documents to arrive, I began the practical work of disentanglement. I went to my local bank. I closed the joint account I had foolishly opened with Thomas years ago for emergencies. I opened a new account in my name only. I instructed the bank manager, a young man who always seemed nervous around Chloe, to refuse any and all future transfer requests from my son or daughter-in-law. I changed the locks on my house. The locksmith was a young man with tattooed arms and a quiet demeanor. As he worked, he said, "Changing locks is funny. People think it's about keeping bad people out. Most of the time, it's about letting yourself be safe inside." His simple wisdom settled in my heart. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. I made one small purchase for myself. For years, I had been using a simple canvas tote bag with a faded museum logo on it to carry my papers. Chloe hated it. "Eleanor, it's falling apart. Let me buy you a proper handbag." I always refused. Now I walked into a fine leather goods store, the kind of place that smelled of money and craftsmanship, and I bought myself a briefcase. It was simple, elegant, made of dark brown leather that was soft as butter. It was not a fashion statement. It was a tool. The price was eye-watering, more than I had spent on myself in a decade. I paid for it from my new account with a new debit card. The transaction was smooth, effortless. It felt like breathing after holding my breath for a very long time. The first counterattack came 2 days later. It was a phone call from Thomas. His voice was a whine of confusion and accusation. "Mom, what's going on? I tried to transfer some money for the car payment, and the bank said the account was closed." I held the phone, my back straight. "Yes, Thomas, that's correct." "What? Why? Is this because of what Chloe said about the doctor? It's for your own good, Mom. We're worried about you." "No, Thomas," I said, my voice even. "It is because my financial situation is no longer a family matter. It is a private one." "But the car payment," he stammered. "We were counting on that." "Then you will have to make other arrangements," I said, and for the first time in my life, I hung up on my son. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with a profound, quiet strength. The next escalation was more direct. Chloe appeared on my doorstep the following afternoon. I saw her luxury SUV pull up through the window. I had the new chain on the door. I opened it just a few inches. Her face, usually a mask of pleasant control, was tight with anger. The smell of her perfume was sharp even through the small opening. "Eleanor, what is this?" she demanded, gesturing to the door chain. "And what did you say to Thomas? He's a wreck." "I am busy, Chloe," I said. "We need to talk. The bank, the locks. You're not well. You're paranoid. This is exactly what I was talking about. You're proving my point." "The appointment is on the 3rd, I said calmly. "We can talk then." In front of the doctor. Her eyes narrowed. She was used to being in control, to setting the terms. My quiet refusal was something she couldn't process. "You are making a huge mistake," she hissed, her voice low. "I don't believe I am," I replied, and gently closed the door. I heard her stand on my porch for a full minute before she spun on her heel and retreated. The day before the appointment, the couriers arrived, one from Geneva, one from London. I now had a slim, elegant briefcase containing a full summary of my multi-million-dollar portfolio, a letter from the CEO of a Swiss financial firm, an invitation to be the keynote speaker at an international academic symposium, and a glowing letter of recommendation from the head of manuscripts at Sotheby's. I laid them all out on my dining room table. These were not just papers. They were my life, the life I had hidden, the competence I had downplayed, the truth I had failed to defend. That night, sleep would not come. I found myself in the dark of the living room, standing before the mantelpiece. My hand went to the worn leather cover of the Areopagitica. I thought of Thomas as a little boy, his small, warm hand in mine as we walked to the park. I remembered the weight of him on my lap, his head with its baby-fine hair tucked under my chin as I read to him. A wave of grief, so sharp and sudden it made me gasp, washed through me. This was the cost. In defending my truth, I was going to shatter my son's world. I was going to lose him, perhaps forever. Was it worth it? Couldn't I just endure? Let them have their conservatorship. Let them manage my local funds while I continued my real life in secret. My reflection stared back at me from the dark glass of the window. a woman with gray hair and tired eyes. For a moment, I saw what Chloe saw, a frail, old woman, easily confused, in need of management. Then my fingers tightened on the book. I thought of Chloe's voice, dripping with condescending pity. You're not well. You're paranoid. I thought of her trying to steal my mind, the very thing I valued most in the world. I thought of Robert, of his quiet belief in me, of his meticulous records, of his final whispered instruction. Keep the work. It's your truth. The grief did not vanish, but it settled. It became a part of the cold, hard resolve in my chest. This was not about revenge. It was about survival. It was about honoring the life I had built with the man I loved. It was about the principle of the thing. I let go of the book. I walked to my closet and chose my clothes for the next day. Not a suit, not a power dress, a simple charcoal gray sheath dress I'd owned for years, the one Robert had always said he liked on me. I would not dress as E.V. Vance, the wealthy authenticator. I would go as Eleanor Vance, the woman they thought they knew. I would let them walk into their own trap, dressed in my humility. I picked up my new leather briefcase. The weight of it was reassuring. I was ready. The day of the appointment, the air was crisp and clear, the sky a brilliant cloudless blue. I drove myself to the medical center. Chloe had insisted on driving me, an offer I had politely but firmly refused. I am perfectly capable of driving, Chloe. Her frustration had been palpable over the phone. Dr. Thorne's office was on the top floor of a gleaming new building. The waiting room did not smell of antiseptic and fear. Like a normal hospital, it smelled of money, a faint scent of jasmine mixed with the expensive leather of the chairs and the crisp, clean air circulated by a silent ventilation system. The art on the walls was original, not prints. This was a place for people who did not wait. Chloe and Thomas were already there. They sat together on a sleek leather sofa. Thomas looked pale and anxious, his eyes darting around the room, refusing to meet mine. Chloe, however, was in her element. She wore a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a flawless chignon. She was the picture of calm, competent concern. She was performing the role of the devoted daughter-in-law for an audience of receptionists and, she hoped, the eminent Dr. Thorne. She stood as I approached, her smile perfectly measured. Eleanor, I'm so glad you made it safely. The implication was clear. It was a miracle I had managed the drive on my own. I had no trouble, I said, my voice quiet. I sat in a chair opposite them, placing my new leather briefcase on the floor beside me. Chloe's eyes flickered to it, a brief, dismissive glance. It was a nice bag, but it was nothing compared to her designer tote that sat on the cushion beside her. In her world, it was just another sign of my provincial taste. Dr. Thorne is running just a few minutes behind, she said, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper as if we were allies. He's very in demand. I simply nodded. I did not need to make small talk. I opened a book I had brought with me, a simple paperback, and began to read. My calmness seemed to unnerve Chloe more than any argument would have. She kept glancing at me, a flicker of irritation in her eyes. She had expected me to be flustered, frightened, perhaps even tearful. She had not expected this quiet composure. After a few minutes, a nurse called my name. Eleanor Vance, Dr. Thorne will see you now. Your family can come in with you. Chloe stood immediately, placing a proprietary hand on Thomas's arm. Of course, she said, taking the lead as we walked down the hallway. Dr. Thorne's office was large and bright, with a wall of windows overlooking the city. He was a tall, slender man with a gentle face and intelligent eyes. He stood to greet us, shaking my hand first. His grip was firm and warm. Mrs. Vance, a pleasure to meet you. Dr. Thorne, I said. He then shook hands with Chloe and Thomas. You must be the family. Please have a seat. We sat in chairs arranged in a semicircle around his large, uncluttered desk. Chloe immediately took control. Doctor, thank you so much for seeing us on such short notice, she began, her voice a symphony of sincerity. We are just so worried about Eleanor, my husband Thomas, and I. She placed a hand on Thomas's knee. He flinched, almost imperceptibly. I see, Dr. Thorne said, his gaze resting on me. Your daughter-in-law tells me you've been experiencing some confusion. Before I could answer, Chloe jumped in. It's been getting progressively worse. Forgetting appointments, losing things, a general sense of being overwhelmed. She had a fall recently. We're just terrified she's going to hurt herself. This house she's in, it's really too much for her. We feel she needs a more structured environment for her own safety. Each word was a carefully polished stone, laid one on top of the other, building a prison of concern around me. Dr. Thorne listened patiently. He made a few notes on a pad, then he turned his full attention to me. His voice was gentle. Mrs. Vance, how have you been feeling? I took a breath. I have been feeling perfectly fine, doctor. Chloe let out a small, sad sigh. See, the denial is part of it. She doesn't even realize. Dr. Thorne held up a hand, silencing her without a word. Mrs. Vance, he said, his eyes kind but searching, your daughter-in-law has made some serious claims. She's suggested you might be a danger to yourself, that you're no longer capable of managing your own affairs. She has mentioned petitioning for a conservatorship. That is a very serious step. What do you have to say to that? This was it, the moment. The trap was sprung. Doctor, I began, my voice clear and steady, the voice of E.V. Vance, my daughter-in-law is correct about one thing. I have been forgetful. I have forgotten my place. Chloe leaned forward, a triumphant gleam in her eye. Yes, exactly, I continued, my gaze locked with the doctor's. I forgot that love is not a transaction. I forgot that a family is not a business. I forgot that my value as a person is not determined by my utility to others. I turned my head slowly and looked at my son. Thomas, do you remember when you were 7 and you couldn't build your castle out of blocks? He looked startled, his face flushing. What? Mom, what does that have to do with anything? Your father sat with you, I said. He taught you that a strong foundation is everything. I have spent the last 15 years trying to be your foundation. I have given you money for your taxes, for your country club, for your cars, for the very house you live in. A house I have never been made to feel welcome in. Chloe scoffed. Eleanor, that's ridiculous. We love having you. I ignored her. I have a number in my head, Thomas, I said quietly. The total amount of money I have given you and your wife since you married. Would you like to hear it? Thomas paled. Mom, please, this isn't the place. Oh, I think it is, I said. I think this is the perfect place. The total is $780,000. The number landed in the silent room with a physical thud. Dr. Thorne's pen stopped moving. Thomas looked as though he had been struck. Chloe's face, for the first time, lost its perfect composure. A mask of disbelief flickered across her features. That's an exaggeration, she stammered. Is it? I reached down and lifted my briefcase onto my lap. The clasps opened with 2 sharp, clean clicks. I took out the first of Robert's ledgers. My husband was an archivist, doctor. He kept meticulous records, and so did I. I opened it and placed it on the doctor's desk. Here is the first wire transfer for the down payment on your house. $150,000. Dated October 14th, 10 years ago. Shall I continue? Chloe stared at the ledger, her mouth slightly agape. This is insane. You're trying to confuse the issue. No, I said. I am clarifying it. You see, doctor, my daughter-in-law believes I am incompetent. She believes this because I live in a modest house, because I wear old clothes, and because I have been generous with my son. She sees these things as weakness, as evidence of decline. I then took the other documents from my briefcase, the portfolio summary from Geneva, the letter from Mr. Dubois. I passed them to Dr. Thorne. This is a summary of my assets, the assets I earned myself, in a career I have pursued for over 40 years. You will see that the $780,000 was, for me, a manageable sum, unwise perhaps, but not debilitating. Dr. Thorne scanned the documents, his eyebrows rising higher with each page. He looked from the papers to me and a slow smile of understanding spread across his face. Chloe was sputtering. What is this, some kind of trick? You worked as a librarian. Robert was an archivist. Where would you get this kind of money? That is an excellent question, I said. I looked her directly in the eye. You've been in my house 100 times. You've seen my books. You once picked up a particularly dusty old thing from my mantel and suggested I replace it with a paperback. I paused, letting the memory hang in the air between us. That dusty old book, Chloe, is a first edition Areopagitica. It's worth more than your house, and I'm the only person in this room who knows why. The silence in the room was absolute. It was thick, heavy, pressing in from all sides. Chloe's face had drained of all color. It was the color of old parchment. Her perfectly painted lips were parted, but no sound came out. Then Dr. Thorne cleared his throat. He picked up the final 2 documents I had given him. And this, he said, his voice carrying a note of profound respect, is a letter from Sotheby's in London, attesting to Mrs. Vance's long career as one of the world's foremost authenticators of 17th century manuscripts. He looked at Chloe. And this is an invitation for her to be the keynote speaker at a symposium in Leipzig, Germany. They are flying her first class and paying her a substantial honorarium to speak about her work. He placed the letters on the desk on top of the financial statements. The heavy cream paper made a soft, definitive sound. So you see, Doctor, Thorne said, his voice gentle but with an edge of steel, the issue is not your mother-in-law's cognitive state. By all accounts, her mind is a great deal sharper than most. The issue is a clear and calculated case of financial exploitation backed by a campaign of psychological abuse designed to create a pretext for seizing control of her assets. Assets, I might add, that you seem to have had no knowledge of. He looked from Chloe to Thomas. This appointment is over. He then did something I did not expect. He looked at his computer. My consultation fee is $5,000. My receptionist will take your payment on the way out. Chloe stood up, her movement stiff, robotic. Of course, she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. She fumbled in her designer tote for her wallet. Thomas remained seated, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Chloe, Thomas, and I walked back to the reception area in a deafening silence. Chloe approached the desk, her back ramrod straight, trying to salvage some shred of her dignity. She handed a platinum credit card to the receptionist. The receptionist swiped it, and then she swiped it again. She frowned. I'm sorry, she said, her voice professionally neutral. It's been declined. Chloe froze. What? That's impossible. Run it again. The receptionist ran it a 3rd time. I'm sorry, ma'am. Declined. The ironic reversal was so swift, so complete, it was almost poetic. Here she was, the performer of wealth, publicly unmasked in this temple of quiet money. Her face, already pale, turned ashen. The humiliation was a physical thing, radiating off her in waves. I'll write a check, she stammered, her hands trembling as she reached for her checkbook. I stepped forward. I opened my simple wallet, the same worn leather one I'd carried for 20 years, and took out my new debit card. I handed it to the receptionist. Let me, I said. My voice was not triumphant. It was merely factual. The receptionist swiped my card. The machine beeped its instant approval. Thank you, Mrs. Vance, she said, handing it back to me with a receipt. Chloe stared at my simple, bank-issued debit card as if it were a venomous snake. The platinum card in her hand, the symbol of her entire identity, was worthless. My humble piece of plastic held all the power. There was nothing left to say. The silence that fell was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I turned to my son. He finally looked up at me, his face streaked with tears. His eyes were filled with a dawning horror, the look of a man who has just realized he has been standing on the wrong side of history. I did not offer him comfort. I simply took the sealed envelope, the one from Robert, from my briefcase. His name, Eleanor, was on the front. I had finally opened it that morning. It contained a single sheet of paper. On it, Robert had written, If you are reading this, it means they have tested you. Now, you must test them. Forgive the one who can learn. The other is a forgery. I looked at Chloe, who was staring into the middle distance.